Toby leaned against the cold surface of the streetlight, his small frame slouched with exhaustion. The chaotic sounds of honking cars and bustling pedestrians filled the air, but Toby's thoughts were elsewhere. His mother's medicine was almost finished, and time was slipping away. He glanced up at the sky, as if searching for reassurance from the heavens. "Mama, I'll get through this. Just hold on a little longer," he whispered, his voice barely audible, hoping the words would somehow reach her back at home. The traffic light blinked red, halting the flow of vehicles. Seizing the moment, Toby darted toward the nearest car with a packet of candy in hand. "5 naira. Please help me out," he called, his voice edged with both routine and desperation. He knocked lightly on car windows, trying not to be intrusive, knowing too well how people reacted when approached by street kids. Some drivers ignored him altogether, keeping their eyes fixed on the road ahead. Others shook their heads in disapproval. Toby's chest tightened with frustration, but he knew he couldn't stop. Finally, a woman in an old sedan rolled down her window and handed him a coin. "Thank you, ma'am. May God bless you," Toby murmured, summoning a tired smile. The woman's eyes softened with sympathy. "How old are you, son?" she asked quietly. "Just 12, ma'am," Toby answered, shifting awkwardly. She shook her head, as if mourning the harshness of the life this boy had been dealt, but said nothing more. The light changed to green, and the woman's car pulled away. Toby slipped the coin into his pocket and returned to the sidewalk, watching the endless stream of cars pass by. With a heavy sigh, he adjusted his candy packets and whispered, "Tomorrow will be better." The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm orange glow over the bustling streets. Toby stood on the curb, clutching packets of candy tightly in his small hands. The day had been long, and his legs ached from standing for hours, but he couldn't stop now. His mother needed medicine, and every coin counted. With determination, he stepped forward as the traffic light blinked red, signaling his chance to make a few sales. Toby weaved through the rows of stationary cars, tapping gently on windows. "5 naira. Please help me out," he called, his voice a mix of politeness and weariness. Some drivers didn't even glance his way, staring straight ahead as if he didn't exist. Others shook their heads, dismissing him with a wave of the hand. Toby swallowed the sting of rejection. It was part of the job, but it never got easier. A few cars down, he spotted a woman in an old, dusty sedan. Taking a deep breath, he approached her window and tapped lightly. To his relief, the woman rolled it down. She reached into her purse and pulled out a single coin, placing it in Toby's outstretched hand. "Thank you, ma'am. May God bless you," Toby said, flashing a grateful, albeit tired, smile. The woman studied him for a moment, her brow furrowed with concern. "How old are you, son?" she asked softly. "Just 12, ma'am," Toby replied, shifting awkwardly under her gaze. The woman shook her head with a sigh, as if she could feel the weight of the burden Toby carried. "Stay safe, okay?" she whispered, but before Toby could respond, the light turned green, and the car rolled forward. Toby tucked the coin into his pocket, feeling its small weight press against his palm. It wasn't much, but it was something, a tiny step closer to the medicine his mother so desperately needed. Returning to the sidewalk, he leaned against a lamppost, watching the endless river of cars rush by. Despite the ache in his feet and the hunger gnawing at his stomach, Toby knew he couldn't afford to rest for long. Every minute mattered. He adjusted the candy packets slung over his shoulder and prepared himself for the next red light. "Tomorrow will be better," he whispered to himself, trying to hold on to the hope that things would change, even though deep down, doubt lingered. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Toby made his way through the narrow streets of his neighborhood. The dusty paths, cracked walls, and dilapidated houses lined both sides of the road, reflecting the hardship that weighed down the entire community. His small feet kicked up clouds of dirt with every step, but he barely noticed. His mind was focused on one thing: getting home to his mother. The door to their modest house creaked as Toby pushed it open, careful not to make too much noise. A dim glow seeped through the cracked windows, barely illuminating the tiny room. The air inside was still, filled with the faint scent of herbs his mother used to mask the symptoms of her illness. "I'm home, Mama," Toby called softly, not wanting to disturb her rest. A weak voice responded from the corner of the room. "Toby, you're back." He hurried to her bedside, where Amina lay on a worn mattress, her frail body wrapped in an old blanket. Her face was pale, and her breath came in shallow, labored gasps. But despite her condition, she smiled at the sight of her son. "Did you sell anything today?" Amina asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Toby knelt beside her and took her hand gently. "A little, Mama. Not much, but I'll try harder tomorrow," he said, forcing a reassuring smile onto his tired face. She squeezed his hand weakly. "You're doing everything you can, my boy. I wish you didn't have to be out there every day." Her words carried the weight of concern and guilt, but Toby shook his head firmly. "Don't worry about me, Mama. I'll figure something out. Just focus on getting better, okay?" Amina's eyes softened, though fatigue clouded them. She raised a trembling hand to touch Toby's cheek. "You're so brave, my son. Your father would be proud." "Let's not talk about that, Mama," Toby whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Just rest. That's what matters now." Amina exhaled slowly, her eyelids fluttering closed. "I'll try, Toby." Toby stood and moved to their tiny kitchen, pulling out what little food they had left. As he stirred the thin porridge on the stove, worry gnawed at him. The money he had earned today wasn't enough, and his mother's condition was worsening. When the meal was ready, he carefully carried the small bowl back to Amina's bedside and helped her eat. They sat together in silence, the weight of their shared struggle unspoken but deeply felt. For now, all they had was each other, and that had to be enough.
Toby stood quietly in the dim kitchen, stirring a pot of thin porridge. The shelves were nearly empty, just a few grains, some stale bread, and a handful of spices remained. The lack of food was a constant reminder of their situation, but Toby knew the real problem wasn't hunger. It was his mother's medicine. The cost had soared beyond what they could afford, no matter how hard he worked. He stirred the pot absently, his thoughts swirling. How am I supposed to earn enough? He wondered, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on his small shoulders. Every day, he sold candy on the streets, braving rejection and exhaustion, but the coins he collected barely made a dent in the ever-growing expenses. With every passing day, the fear of running out of medicine grew stronger. A soft cough from the other room pulled him from his thoughts. Toby rushed to his mother's side, finding Amina struggling to sit up. "I'm okay," she whispered, waving him off weakly, though the pallor of her skin told a different story. "You need to rest, Mama," Toby said gently, guiding her back onto the mattress. "I've got everything under control." He wished his words felt true, but deep inside, anxiety gnawed at him. He was only 12, and despite all his efforts, it felt like the world was slipping further from his grasp. But he couldn't let his mother see that. She needed hope, not worry. Toby returned to the kitchen, pouring the thin porridge into a small bowl. It wasn't much, but it would have to do for tonight. He carried it back to Amina's bedside, sitting beside her as she slowly ate with his help. "I'm sorry, Mama. I know it's not much," he whispered, feeling guilty for not being able to provide more. Amina gave him a tired smile. "Don't apologize, my boy. You're doing more than anyone your age should have to." They sat together in the dim room, the silence between them heavy but comforting. Both knew how fragile their situation had become. They were running out of food, medicine, and time. Yet, in this quiet moment, they found a sliver of peace in each other's presence. As Toby lay down beside his mother later that night, exhaustion pulled at him, but his mind remained restless. He knew tomorrow would bring more challenges, more rejection, and more uncertainty. But he had no choice. His mother's life depended on it. Adewale leaned back in his leather chair, staring at the towering pile of papers on his desk. Contracts, reports, and business deals cluttered the surface, demanding his attention. He should have been reviewing them, but his mind wandered far from the numbers and deadlines. The weight of success, once a source of pride, now felt heavy, almost suffocating. Despite his wealth and achievements, something was missing, something money could not fill. Adewale lived in a grand mansion perched atop the hills, surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens and guarded by discreet security. The mansion's lavish rooms, adorned with fine art and imported furniture, were the epitome of luxury. Yet, within those walls, Adewale often found himself feeling strangely empty. His wealth gave him control over almost everything, except the moments that truly mattered. His thoughts drifted to Dara, his 8-year-old daughter. He had promised himself many times to spend more time with her, but life kept pulling him in different directions. Meetings, phone calls, business trips, there was always something more urgent. Now, as he sat in his office, guilt gnawed at him. He hadn't seen Dara properly in days, and her absence weighed on him. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Paula, his assistant, stepped in quietly. "Mr. Adewale, the driver is waiting for you. Your meeting downtown is in 30 minutes. Adewale nodded absent-mindedly, adjusting his tie. "And Dara? Did she leave for school?" "Yes, sir. The nanny took her. She was asking for you before she left," Paula replied, her tone respectful, but tinged with subtle reproach. Adewale sighed deeply, guilt washing over him. He remembered the way Dara looked at him that morning, her eyes filled with unspoken hope that he might stay home for once. But, like always, he had been too busy to notice until now. "Leave the documents ready for tomorrow's meeting," Adewale said, gathering his things. "And tell her I'll be home for dinner tonight." Paula gave a polite nod, though she had heard that promise many times before. As Adewale walked toward the car waiting outside, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from the nanny. "Dara says she misses you, Daddy. Are you coming to play with her today?" Adewale stared at the message, guilt settling deeper into his heart. "Yes, Dara. Today for sure," he replied, though uncertainty lingered in his mind. As the car descended from the hills, Adewale looked out at the bustling streets of the city below. The view felt distant, as if he were merely a spectator in a world where real connections eluded him. Adewale sat quietly in the back seat of his sleek black car, watching the city pass by through tinted windows. The streets bustled with life, people rushing, street vendors shouting, and children laughing. Yet, all of it felt far away from him, as if he were on the outside looking in. Despite his wealth, Adewale felt an emptiness that no amount of money or success seemed able to fill. His phone buzzed again, and he glanced down. The message from Dara replayed in his mind. "Daddy, are we going to play today? I miss you." He had responded with a quick promise, but now, as the car rolled through the city, he wondered if he could really keep it. Guilt gnawed at him. Dara had everything a child could want: beautiful clothes, the best toys, and a big home. But he knew none of it mattered to her. What she wanted most was time with him, and that was the one thing he hadn't given her. Lately, her drawings revealed what she couldn't say aloud: big houses, beautiful gardens, and one small figure standing alone. The image haunted him. It was as if, in her young heart, she was showing him how lonely she felt in the world he had built. Adewale sighed, loosening his tie. He tried to convince himself that work was essential, that his success was for her future. But deep down, he knew he was hiding behind his responsibilities. He was afraid of facing the moments that truly mattered, the simple, quiet moments with Dara. The car slowed as it approached his office building. Adewale glanced at his watch, the minutes ticking away like a countdown. "I'll play with her tonight," he whispered to himself. But as he stepped out of the car, the familiar doubt crept in. Could he really follow through this time? Night had fallen, and the city lights flickered like distant stars as two lives, worlds apart, moved closer to an unseen crossroad. On one side of the city, Toby sat by his mother's bedside, listening to the faint sound of her breathing. The air in the room was thick with unspoken fears. Every day was a battle against time, selling candy, earning coins, and hoping it would be enough to buy her next dose of medicine. Yet deep down, Toby knew that his efforts barely scratched the surface of what they needed. The weight of responsibility felt heavier with each passing day, but he forced himself to hold on to hope. He leaned in closer to Amina, brushing a few strands of hair away from her face. "Don't worry, Mama. I'll figure it out. Tomorrow will be better," he whispered, more to convince himself than her. His mother gave him a faint smile, the kind of smile that tried to mask pain and concern. They both knew that time wasn't on their side, but neither wanted to admit it out loud. Meanwhile, across town in a sprawling mansion, Adewale sat alone in his study, nursing a glass of water and staring at the message from his daughter. "Daddy, will we play today?" The words replayed in his mind like a haunting refrain. He wanted to be the father Dara deserved, but somehow, his business always seemed to get in the way. Even as he promised her time and time again, the demands of his success kept pulling him away. He looked at the clock ticking on the wall. It wasn't too late. He could go to Dara right now, sit with her, and make good on his promise for once. But as he stood to leave, the heavy weight of habit and guilt pulled him back down. Tomorrow, he thought. I'll be better tomorrow. In that moment, both Toby and Adewale clung to hope for the future, Toby hoping to find a way to save his mother, and Adewale hoping to rebuild the connection with his daughter. But neither could see how fragile that hope truly was. Each was standing at a crossroads, their lives unknowingly set on a path that would soon intersect. As Toby lay down beside his mother and Adewale picked up his phone to send another message to Dara, both believed that tomorrow would offer the chance to change. What they didn't realize was that tomorrow was already in motion, and the decisions they made now would shape everything that came next. The first light of dawn crept through the cracks in Toby's window, stirring him from a restless sleep. His mother's shallow breaths filled the quiet room, reminding him that time was running out. Toby sat up slowly, rubbing his tired eyes, knowing he had to face another long day on the streets. But something inside him felt heavier than usual, like the weight of all his hopes, promises, and fears had settled in his chest overnight. He needed more than coins and candy sales. He needed a miracle. Meanwhile, across town, Adewale sat on the edge of his bed, lost in thought. His phone rested beside him, displaying Dara's latest message, "Will you play with me today, Daddy?" He sighed deeply, overwhelmed by a familiar sense of guilt. His promises to Dara always sounded sincere, yet they crumbled under the weight of meetings and deadlines. But today felt different. Today, Adewale felt something stir inside him, a sense that if he didn't act now, the distance between him and his daughter would become permanent. Both Toby and Adewale stepped out into the city that morning, unaware that their paths were about to cross. Toby clutched his packets of candy as he walked toward the bustling intersections, his mind racing with thoughts of how he could earn enough to buy the medicine his mother needed. On the other side of town, Adewale cancelled his meetings for the morning, determined to spend time with Dara. But fate had other plans. As Adewale's car stopped at a red light near one of the city's busiest intersections, Toby darted toward the vehicle, his small hands knocking gently on the tinted window. "5 naira, please. Help me out," he called, exhaustion seeping into his voice. Adewale, lost in thought, hesitated before rolling down the window. Their eyes met, one, a boy carrying the weight of survival on his young shoulders, the other, a man burdened with regrets he couldn't seem to shake. Something unspoken passed between them in that moment, a shared understanding of struggle, loneliness, and the hope for redemption. Without a word, Adewale reached into his wallet and handed Toby more than just a coin. It was enough to buy the medicine his mother so desperately needed. Toby's eyes widened in disbelief. "Thank you, sir. May God bless you," he whispered, his voice trembling. Adewale gave a faint smile, watching the boy dart away toward the narrow streets. As the light turned green, Adewale knew that this small act wouldn't solve everything, but it felt like a beginning, a moment where he finally made the right choice. And in the quiet hours that followed, both Toby and Adewale held on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, things were starting to change.